Now, it can be difficult to come up with a good plot. In fact, it's really difficult to come up with a good plot. But you can come up with just standard plots. A lot of plots are pretty much set out there for you. You're going to do a murder mystery. You're going to start with somebody dying, and then you're going to have your detectives come in and investigate. Then they're going to build up clues, probably take some false leads until they find the killer. Then they either have to just bring in the killer, or in variations they have to hunt down the killer, things like that. That's a murder mystery. Basically, that's the entire plot of most murder mystery stories. The most basic plot. The most basic plot of, for instance, a romance story is two people meet each other, somewhat dislike each other at first, but are undeniably attracted. Then slowly, over the course of several other events, which are basically a secondary plot to the main one, they fall in love. Eventually, they consummate this love, either by getting married or just doing the deed, face the end resolution of the secondary plot, and go on merrily hand in hand, happily ever after. That's built into the genre, basically. The basic plot is always built into the genre. But the real meat and potatoes of any story, especially in a wide open genre, which is less structured, like for instance a sci-fi story, a fantasy story is fairly structured, but you can do a lot of other stuff with it. So it's not as structured as you think of it on first glance. Urban fantasy is fairly structured, surprisingly so, but there's still a lot of wiggle room in that one as well. The most unstructured types of stories are basically horror or mainstream fiction. You can do a lot with that. Mainstream fiction is a weird title to give to something. It's the stuff you just find in the fiction section of the bookstore, the things that aren't specifically labeled science fiction or fantasy, though most mainstream fiction is one or the other in a lot of ways. Some of it isn't, some of it's just straightforward. And this also doesn't include things like murder mysteries or romance novels, basically. It's a catch-all category that includes a whole range of books and stories. But, again, some of these are really structured, some of them aren't. Mainstream fiction is a wide open field. You can do practically anything in it. People have done practically anything in it. I've read some really weird books that I didn't get, and that were mainstream fiction. And I read some really straightforward fantasy stories that were still in mainstream fiction when they should have, by all rights, been in the fantasy section of the bookstore. I don't know the criteria they use in the publishing world. I hope to learn the criteria they use when I eventually start publishing books. Fingers crossed on that. I do have a book that I'm attempting to shop around to agents right now. But basically, yeah. Stay out of my camera, kitty. You've had your cameo. You're done. Plot. Very essential to the story is the story, basically. You start out with your main plot, whatever that happens to be. Again, in a romance story or a detective novel, it's all laid out for you. The main plot, at least. And then you fill in the major details. For the romance story and for the detective novel and for anything as structured as those, the details are where it all is at. That's where the story is. That's what's so important. For something a little more open-ended, like for instance, what I'm trying to do, the major plot has to be structured differently. It isn't given to you in the genre. I had to build it. I generally work in a rough outline of a plot. I like to plot in events and character interactions before, and then add stuff as I'm writing. Everything, just kind of, the plot that I write can be seen as a skeleton of the story. And on this skeleton, which is basically event A leads to event B, leads to event C, which splits off into events D through F, which all comes back together in event G, which leads to event H. That's how I kind of structure my stories. A lot of them are fairly linear when I do them. You'll find other authors who have plots that are extremely non-linear, and if they actually had a plot laid out, and for a non-linear story, you really need to have your plot laid out before you start writing. It would probably look something like a weird web diagram where things leading through each other and branching out from each other all over the place. I tend to be a lot more linear in what I'm doing. I like to have a bit of foreshadowing. I like to have some things feeding from the past into the future, but I don't like to do too much with nonlinear plotting or with multiple time periods interacting with each other. At least I haven't done anything like that yet, and I don't know how I would do it if I ever wanted to. So it would be a new experience if I tried to do something like that. For National Novel Writing Month, I decided that I was going to write a plot that was fairly straightforward. And again, remembering my prime objective to showcase a particular character, I had to create a plot that would allow me to showcase a particular character, still write a fairly compelling story, and give me a chance to stretch a few other creative muscles. The plot I chose was actually a fairly basic plot in the urban fantasy genre, where an outsider gets introduced to the fantastic world that exists all around them. Now, in usual urban fantasy stories like that use this basic plot structure, you have this particular outsider, usually a young person, who has some talent of their own, magical talent of their own, or is at least going to have some magical talent later on. Either there's someone who a vampire falls in love with. If you read Twilight, it's a basic premise of the first book. There is a character who enters a world where they don't know the rules anymore because it's now fantastic, where the world around them suddenly becomes something different, something fantastic by the introduction of them to this world of magic. I can't believe I used Twilight as an example, but it's true. And my story uses the same basic plot. There's an outsider, someone who is from normalcy, basically. Not necessarily an everyman, but someone who is only accustomed with a world that we would recognize as the real world. And then suddenly their perspective is shifted. Something happens to them. They meet somebody. Whatever happens, it changes everything for them. And no longer are they part of the world we would recognize. Now they're seeing that it's really this other world, this world full of wonder and monsters and magic and great things and terrible things. And, another one like that, the first Harry Potter book. So a lot better than the first Twilight book, for an example. It opens up their eyes, and they are transported, given an entirely new perspective on things. That's what I'm doing here. So you start with a basically normal character. I chose the route that this basically normal character was never completely normal. But she didn't know it, and neither did anyone else. And then something happens to her. She encounters this other world, and it opens up her eyes. Not only does she start seeing things from this other world, starting to recognize what she never realized was always around her, but she'll also has something, she's attached to this world in a way, or the world that is attached to her, and she's forced to interact with it. She isn't open, her eyes aren't open to this world, and then she has the choice of closing them again. No. She has to deal with it. They're going to force themselves into her life, whether she likes it or not. And so, our main character, our viewpoint character at least, is someone who's floundering away in a new world where she doesn't understand the rules, where things are at once familiar and different, completely new. She's got to deal with that. The plot being that new character enters this world, has to deal with it. The world, something in the world is affecting her, specifically, targeting her. It can either be, in a lot of cases, it's some secret society. In this case, in my story, it's some secret society. Yeah, I went there. And the meat of the story is about her finding her place in this new world, fighting off the new enemies that she suddenly acquires with the help of my showcase character, who is the true hero of the story, but not the viewpoint character. She's someone already acquainted with this world, already a part of it, immersed in it, so much so that the real normal world is the strange and different one for her. But you can't write a story like that because, well, it's really hard to sympathize with a character like that. You could, if you were a really good writer, write a story like that, but it's not something I'm prepared to try for National Novel Writing Month. A fairly straightforward entrance to new mystical world story, yeah, that I can handle. It's ambitious to do it the other way around. But, so she's got to fight off, and in the end, she either has to take this knowledge, true hero's journey style, and either go back to the world that she knew, bringing with her all this knowledge of this new realm, this new magical place that exists all around her, or fully immerse herself in this new world, become a part of it, and basically forget the old. There's not a lot of room for middle ground in these stories usually. We'll see how mine turns out. Anyways, I've got to get back to writing so I can catch up with my quota. Hopefully by the next video I will be all caught up and getting ahead of things. Until then, I hope you enjoy reading and writing.